Welcome to another episode of InRange. This is the March 2021 Q&A. All of these questions are provided by Patreon supporters at the $5 level and above, and I'm very thankful to all of them because without you out there keeping this alive via Patreon, there wouldn't be InRange because we have no sponsors, no corporate overlords, nothing, no monetization from YouTube intentionally, strictly a viewer-supported project. Lots of questions. Let's go ahead and just get going. Stuka444. Any chance of a big match in the US this year from you guys? Actually, yes, there is a chance. I think there's light at the end of the tunnel for the things that we've been facing in terms of why we haven't been able to run a match yet. And I don't think we're going to miss 2021 with the Desert Brutality. In fact, I just announced via Patreon and on our Discord server that we're targeting November of this year for Desert Brutality 2021. Now, the two-gun army and above Patreon supporters will get early entry possibility to this match at a discount. And then after that, subsequently, all other Patreon supporters will get early entry as well after the two-gun army's potential has been essentially exhausted. Now, what this meant in 2020 was that there were very few public seats left open for Desert Brutality 2020 besides Patreon supporters. And I don't have a problem with that because you're the guys that keep the channel alive, and it's really great to have all the supporters and viewers together in one place. Now, I don't know if that'll be the same for 2021, but as I said, the two-gun army and above will get early entry capabilities with a discount, then all other Patreon supporters, and then it'll eventually go to public. So once again, targeting November of this year, and I think we are going to have Desert Brutality 2021. Thomas S. What is your favorite meal to make? That's a tough one. I honestly really enjoy cooking and making food, and so I have a lot of them that I really like. I'll just say a few that just pop into mind immediately. One of them is green chili stew. That's something I really enjoy and I love to eat, but I also really enjoy making it. There's just something about the process that's very enjoyable. I do like making I like making jambalaya. That's something I enjoy as well. I'm gonna stick with those two right now. They maybe aren't even, those are things I really like to eat. They're maybe not my favorite meals on earth, but they're two of my favorites to actually make myself. Cameron W. As vaccines become more available, what aspect of normal, in quotes, life do you most anticipate? Honestly, just being around people again. This year's been very isolating. Some of us more so than others. Some of us took this situation differently than others. Our approaches were, as unique as we are individuals. I've stayed pretty isolated. As you know, I skipped Finnish brutality because I wasn't able to acquire my vaccine yet for those concerns and for just what I considered to be responsible. I've skipped a vast majority of local matches because the same reasons. I've been running my regular two-gun match, but with special protocols in place to make it more viable and more safe. But now that I have been vaccinated myself, at least my first dose, and my second dose comes up in just about another week and a half or so, I suspect that it'll be nice to be able to be around other people without less concerns. As more of us get vaccinated, we can do it without masks, which would be really nice. I mean, none of us like those things. I don't like masks, and I understand that. And so I'm really just enjoying being around other people, maybe going out to eat at a restaurant again, but most importantly, being able to run and shoot matches in the way we've always done. And as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, Desert Brutality 2021 seems viable. Philip W. Is there a shelf life for polymer firearms? That's a challenging question, and I don't know that all polymer is exactly the same. Polymer in general degrades over time, but we're talking about in moments of time that generally don't matter to the individual, as well as exposure. So UV tends to break down polymers in a way that it wouldn't, like metal, of course. But in reality, the polymers we have nowadays, unless you just leave the gun in the sun for years, I don't think it really matters. So is there a shelf life for modern polymer firearms? And I would say, unless you're doing something silly and abusive with it, my answer to that is probably not. They're strong enough to sustain round count. They're strong enough to be in the field. They're strong enough to be in ice, in heat, wet, mud, all of those things, as we've shown on the channel regularly. They may not be good for just leaving in the sun for years and years at a time, but who does that? Jordan. If the U.S. military allowed Winchester to revise the design of a lever gun to their specifications, do you think it would have been adopted as a standard issue rifle? I assume you mean during like the Indian Wars. We're talking 1870s, 1880s. And no, I do not think it would have been adopted as a standard issue rifle. This is a time and place in which even single shot weapons may face incredible scrutiny and bias if they didn't have a hammer, for example, to indicate their cocked status, so that the officer walking down the line could see the condition of the firearm in theory by just looking at them. In a military that was that stuck in doctrine and that concerned about the state of the rifle based on something visually visible to the officer, as well as their general concerns about ammunition supply and resupply, I don't think anything Winchester could have done would have necessarily gotten that to be issued as a standard rifle, even though I think it would have probably saved a lot of soldiers' lives, at least on the federal side. Craig S. Thoughts on the new upcoming Zastava M90? I looked at it. I haven't held one personally. I watched some videos. And my thoughts are, it's a 5.56 AK with an RPK style receiver, meaning it's going to be heavier than it needs to be, with an adjustable gas piston. Maybe there's more to it than that, but that's what I got from it. And I don't know why I'd want my 5.56 gun to have an RPK style receiver and be heavier rather than lighter. And as for an adjustable gas system, you can already do that with aftermarket parts. So I would rather just modify a existing 5.56 gun that isn't intentionally heavier. And I don't know why or what to say about this Zastava that differentiates it in any way besides the weight. Maybe that it comes like that out of the box. But to be honest with you, not very interested. I've got two questions here about FK75. Rumble strip. Is the 7.5 Berno cartridge one that would make a PCC actually useful? A potential modern analog to the 30 caliber M1 carbine. And Jamie B. Do you think the use of the 7.5 FK round in firearms like an SMG or PDW would add new advantages to the class of weapon? Well, I think the 7.5 cartridge has a lot of potential. I showed that in my video where I actually used the PSD pistol in 7.5 as a rifle at a rifle match. I used it for pistol and rifle and was able to make, with a pistol and a red dot, relatively easily make 150-yard hits. If you were to put that into a long arm, you're going to make that even easier. If you were able to brace the pistol, NFA aside, that would make it even easier as well. Do I think this cartridge has potential as an SMG or submachine gun and PDW round? And I absolutely do think it does. There are other rounds on the market that would as well that never saw that, like 357 SIG would be another example of that. But yeah, I think this 7.5 cartridge, as well as its proprietary, or not proprietary, but somewhat specialized projectiles, really does lend itself to some interesting roles and capabilities in a relatively low recoil pistol capable cartridge. I hope we see more development with the 7.5 FK round, and I hope to do a lot more work with the PSD pistol as well. G3 Yost. Other than just bringing people and showing them YouTube videos, how can we grow interest in action challenge and brutality match formats? I think talk. I don't know what else to say. I think community is where this lies. Now, YouTube videos help, but I think community can make this different. I think by slowly turning the rudder on what is considered the conventional match attendees and having the kind of hopefully increasing diversity that we've been able to have at the action challenge matches and the brutality matches would be something that over time will gather steam and will be seen as a friendly environment. Other things, not just friendly, but fun. You know, some of these matches that I go to, quite honestly, aren't all that fun. And it's not that the match itself couldn't be fun, it's that the environment's not fun. Everybody's stressed out. Everyone's like in this hyper-competitive mode. And this isn't everything, but there's a lot of them like this. And by the time the day is done, I went to go enjoy myself and do as well as I could. But at the end, it was more of a stressful environment than it was a fun one. And there are things that lend themselves to that. One of them is prizes based on performance. that definitely causes an environment like that. Stage design causes environments like that. Quite honestly, match directors or match competitors taking themselves, frankly, too seriously. I'm not talking about not serious about like safety and such. I'm talking about just themselves too seriously lend to an environment like that. I think we need to add levity to these environments. I think we want to be there to have a good time. I think we want to build community. And I think we want to have fun, but we also want to do the best that we can. And the more we do that, and the more our community grows and we talk to our friends and others about it and bring them to watch or show them a YouTube video or tell them about our experience, the more potential we have for that environment to grow and become positive and broader in its spectrum. So I don't have a better answer than that. It's the best I got. Tyler H. Now that you've had some time using the E-Tint Control MS1s on the clock, those are the glasses, guys, that are electronic. So you can set them to automatically dim in bright environments and then turn off to clear in not bright environments, or you can hit a button to do that. I really like the concept, and I did a video about them, a couple videos, and I've been using them at matches. What is my opinion on them so far? I like them. I like them quite a bit. They're comfortable. They're clear. They've been reasonably reliable in terms of the automatic setting, although if you wear a hat, you can get some strange detection about when it's not bright or versus that, so I tend to use the button. The one thing I can say that's a little bit of a concern is that when they go to tinted mode, they're not as dark as I would like them to be, but I'm also here in this environment, this incredibly bright environment. So it would be nice if they could get a little darker from clear to dark. They get more like a smoke versus a dark, but I don't think that would affect a lot of people. I think most people aren't in environments that are as bright as this. So I really like them. They're reliable. They're comfortable. It's neat to be able to use them as clears or smoke tint. I just wish they could be a little darker. Dark PR0. How much can a shooting jacket and trousers improve someone's scores in the expert to master categories, or let's say the region of high power competition? So for those of you that don't know what we're talking about here, high power competitions, the typical across the course. You shoot 200 yards standing, 200 yards seated rapid fire, 300 yards prone rapid fire, support with a sling, and then 600 yard or 500 yard slow fire. Again, or no artificial support, you use a sling for support. And that jacket, those shooting jackets, the trousers not as much. The shooting jacket is this like bondage-like suit that provides rigidity through your back and allows you when you're offhand to frankly be substantially more stable than you could be without it. It makes a huge difference in scores. And when you're prone, the ability to crank that sling to literally almost E-note tightness without damaging your arm because of the jacket's protective capabilities allows you to stay far more rigid and secure and on target in both the prone positions at 300, 200, and seated as well, but it's 300 and 600. You get that thing tight, you lock into it, and it gives you incredible support, like really like a bipod, quite honestly. So I would say that if you're going to be truly competitive in high power across the course, a proper shooting jacket, sadly, is fundamental. You really require it. Can you do well without it? Yes, but you're going to be making it much, much harder on yourself. And when everyone else has that gear and you don't, you're putting yourself at a significant disadvantage. London Jolly. How difficult would you say the NFA transfer process is? And do I have any plans to look at micron kits? So these are two questions, actually, but they sort of dovetail, right? So the NFA process, you said transfer. That's different than what you might do for, say, an SBR. So transfer process would be like, there is a legally transferable machine gun, and I want to buy it. How difficult is that? It's slow and boring. You have to get your fingerprints taken. You can do that at the Silencer Co. kiosk in some instances. And you have to fill out a bunch of paperwork, and you have to send it in and with a $200 check, and you wait forever. Really forever. You wait a year, maybe 2 years, depends on what's going on. And if it's a firearm from another state, you might have to do the transfer twice. It can get really difficult. And then guess what? If it's twice, you're doing double the wait. So the NFA transfer process is a giant pain in the ass. If you wanted to look at the Micron, which by the way is the short barrel rifle version of the Desert Tech MDR, that's different. You need to make an SBR, and anybody that is not a legally prohibited possessor in the right state can file to create an SBR. And that's a much easier process. You fill out the forms, you do the silencer code thing, or you just send it in. You could do e-forms, and those tend to come back quicker. I'm hearing that those come back anywhere between a couple months to 6 months. And so I am hoping to SBR my Desert Tech MDR, and I would like to look at the microns. So transfer is a lot different than SBR process. So all of it sucks. Matt G. I know he's extremely busy with his own channel, but Ian's been pretty scarce on here lately. Is he a regular member of the InRange TV crew, or is he going to be more of a guest collaborator at this point? Honestly, we've addressed this a number of times. Ian has too. Ian's schedule with Forgotten Weapons is crazy. At least for me. I would not want to do the schedule he's doing. Now, that said, he loves it, and that's his life's ambition. He's traveling way more than he's not. He's not home very much, and he's all over the place doing all sorts of Forgotten Weapon stuff. He does show up on InRange intermittently. We just did some footage recently, actually, that will show up at some point together. And, of course, he was at Finished Brutality. But quite honestly, just to be upfront, he's going to be on intermittently at best. I am diversifying the co-host element of InRange. You may have just seen Annette Evans doing this new series called On Her Own about a women's approach to self-defense and self-defense tools. I'm really excited about that project. Obviously, you've seen Russell Fagan and Sinister Rifleman doing lots of content here, more reviews coming from him. And I've tried to do some collaborative Q&As with some other cool channels, which you've seen some of, and there's more of that to come. So will Ian be around? Yes. Can I tell you how often? No. Will it be regular? No. John H. Given that most civilian self-defense shootings happen at very close range and might involve physical contact and shooting through clothing, isn't a revolver a better choice than a semi-auto in many ways? That is a very contentious question. Obviously, revolvers diminish your overall ammunition capacity. Now, that said, the overall ammunition required in statistically average self-defense shootings is not very much. Sometimes the presence of a gun is more than enough. Frequently it is. In civilian self-defense shootings, 1 to 3 rounds is very common. When you're in a grapple situation, 1 to 3 rounds is very common. Semi-automatics do have liabilities in close quarters in that the slide cannot reciprocate all the way if you have to fire a second round. Sometimes if you were to push it into your adversary, you can take it out of battery, it won't fire at all. Those are things that don't happen with a revolver. But a revolver can get caught on things as well. If the person, your adversary, grabs the cylinder, you may not be able to fire the gun because it won't turn to fire. It can get caught up in clothing. Personally, for the average, and again, there are outliers, and that's the challenge here, but in average self-defense scenarios, and especially in grappling scenarios, I personally tend to think that the revolver has a little bit, not a lot, of an advantage in that environment. Your mileage may vary. I realize that a lot of people are going to feel differently about that, but I don't think a revolver really hurts you. It might help you, but that isn't to say that you can't use a semi-automatic very effectively as well. That said, all of this requires significant training, and the best course for this, and I've said this on InRange a number of times, is South Narc's ECQC course. It is phenomenal. If you carry a firearm for self-defense, I cannot advise you highly enough to go take South Narc's ECQC course, sometimes also called ShivWorks. Absolutely fundamental, and you'll come to find that the differences between a revolver and semi-automatic don't matter all that really much. Dandy Echo. I tried to ask this when Atun Shea was on, but would still like to know your opinion. Why do you think the Confederacy did not try to continue a guerrilla campaign against the Union? Oh, I think they did. Now, I don't know that it was a unilateral effort, but there was definitely elements of it. Some people have argued, and some might argue still, that Jesse James was doing that. But this is very contentious. But I'm going to say this. Let's say the worst, but probably most prolific example of the Confederacy's guerrilla campaign, quite sadly, is the Ku Klux Klan. Now, they, of course, had many other agendas besides that, but the Klan definitely was a guerrilla campaign against Union interests, as well as, of course, the continued promotion of racial racial issues. So I would argue, and I think you can argue, that the Klan was and continues to be a guerrilla campaign. Michael W. Are thumb external safeties on striker-fired pistols, i.e. the new variant of the Hellcat, obsolescent, or are they designed for specific carry positions like appendix to reduce the risk of AD? I think they're on there because they're trying to capitalize on as much sales in the market as possible, and there's a certain element of the gun carrying community that really want an external thumb mounted or thumb style safety. I personally don't think you need them. I think a dingus, a safe trigger, or a dingus on a trigger for the purposes of drop safe, etc., makes sense. But training and a proper trigger weight, we're not talking 20 pounds New York trigger, but a proper trigger weight and a proper holster mitigate these concerns. If you train properly, your finger won't go on the trigger until you're ready to fire. And I actually personally think that a thumb mounted external or thumb external safety tends to be more of a liability than a benefit. There is, you can train around that, of course. You can get to the point where you always sweep it off. And that's a training thing. If you have a thumb safety, always learn to sweep it off before you fire. But in, like, just as I mentioned earlier, ECQC course, under stress, things happen. That safety is on and you pull in the trigger, it's not firing. I think that they're more of a liability than a benefit. And I think the reason that you see them on guns is that because there's a certain element of the market that think they need them. I don't think they do. I think training is the solution to this problem. But if they want to sell more guns, they're going to make as many different variants as possible to sell to the widest diversity of people's interests and desires as possible. Matt G. Ignoring any potential legal issues, or whether anyone would actually want to buy one, is there any technical reason you couldn't make a smokeless powder muzzleloader, assuming you use the appropriate steel for the chamber and barrel? No, this is a technical question. I'm not going to go into the market or the legalities or any of that stuff here, or the issues of someone using the wrong powder, like putting pistol powder or something. That aside, could you do this technically? Absolutely. With the right proper steel and the right design for the right pressures, there would be no reason you couldn't use smokeless powder in a muzzleloader designed to use smokeless powder. Completely possible. The reasons they don't do that is for lots of reasons. Legal reasons, liability reasons, those sorts of concerns. But from a completely technical perspective, you could absolutely make a muzzleloader that uses smokeless powder. Seth G. How much of a handicap does the magazine placement and bad trigger of the Desert Take MDR make versus an AR-15 on the clock? First of all, I don't know where you heard the Desert Take MDR has a bad trigger. As bullpups go, it has pretty much the best bullpup trigger, and it's perfectly fine and serviceable against almost any normal AR-15. Is it as good as an AR-15 SLT1 match trigger? No. Is it totally serviceable and even better than a standard AR-15 mil-spec trigger? Yeah, it is. So I don't know where you got the idea that the Desert Tech MDR has a bad trigger. As for the magazine placement, this is going to get me heat because in one of our earlier videos where we discussed and debated bullpups, I talked about ergonomic issues. But the Desert Tech's designed in a way that where the magazine goes and the fact that it has a magazine release for your finger, your trigger finger, or you can push it out as you're pulling the magazine out, as well as the bolt hold open being Tavor-like in the rear, that when you insert the magazine, you can just push it to let the bolt go home, means that they've mitigated much of the speed and ergonomic concerns of a bullpup in terms of magazine changes. That said, this is a training issue. You would want to train with the MDR extensively because it is a different manual of arms than a standard traditional rifle, whether it's an AR-15 or an AK or something else. So if you do ARs all the time and you go to change the mag, you're kind of you kind of revert back to what you're used to, and you got to change and go, oh, it's back here now. That said, if you use the MDR a lot, I think you'll find that it's frankly just as fast. That might be a change of things I've said earlier on the channel, and that's okay. I'm allowed to learn over time and make different decisions over time. And in this instance, I think it can be done. Space Cowboy from New Jersey. If one were to make a Western following the common tropes of the genre, but set in the modern day, could it still be qualified to be called a Western? And if not, what's the most modern time period you could go before it's not a Western anymore? You can absolutely make a Western based in just 2021. I don't think there's anything about a Western that has to be set into a specific time frame. Now, traditionally most are, but there are modern Westerns as well, or Westerns that deal with relatively modern times. No Country for Old Men is the best instance of this, but there are many others and there's quite a few of them. And I think that the genre is not necessarily stuck to a specific time frame. And I think you can absolutely make a Western based in completely modern times. And I mentioned one that exists, and there are definitely others. That's the first one that comes off the top of my mind. John W. If the logistics were feasible, would you ever open a training school for competition shooting? Probably not. The training environment and the competition for training dollars is extreme. Most people don't want to go to a training school for competitions. They don't care about that. If they're going to training, they're going there for either to touch the magic, meaning the trainer that they're being trained, that they're going to train with, is someone that they see as a star, or they have some sort of parasocial relationship to, or they have some sort of amazing history that makes them want to be around them, or they want to go to the training school because they're there for truly dedicated self-defense purposes and applications like ECQC. I think the market for training for competitions is very minimal, would never really have a lot of traction, would get a lot of friction and scoffing at in the community, and you would be arguing, first of all, most people don't train at all, and the ones that do train want to train in self-defense, not for competition. So no, I don't think I'd ever bother with that. Vercingetorix. Sorry for mispronouncing your alias. Having worked in information technology for several years, you have likely been a part of several projects. Several is an understatement. What, in your opinion, separates a good project manager from a bad project manager? A good project manager is one that actually is goal-oriented towards actually meeting the intentions of the project and allowing the technical capabilities of the people around them to be even superior to those, and step aside when their technical staff is capable of handling the task better than they can. Project manager is there to align resources, to align timelines, and to make sure that the people doing the work that are the tech people can actually get their task done and get the barriers out of the way. That's what a good project manager does. And they don't use paperwork and process as what they think as the actual project. They make the goals. They make the goals the end result. Bad project managers make the process the goal, meaning they think that because the project management is their goal, therefore that's the project. No. The project is to install firewalls. The project isn't to do project management or to create 17 freaking different project documents. The project is to get the project done, and project managers should be there to help facilitate that. Very frequently, project managers mistake the process for the result. Peter H. What kind of face mask were you wearing in the vaccine selfie and using during match footage for the Black Label Bipod MDR video? And does it work for high-intensity activities? Yes, it does. It's the Airlock 389. I can provide a link to a Kickstarter for that. I got it as kind of an early beta. It is actually washable, so you don't have to, you can take the filter out and clean it and then put it back in, which is really nice. It's really good for all sorts of dust and particulate, and according to my understanding, it's actually rated reasonably bidirectionally for protection both to you and to people around you, unlike a cloth mask, which tends to only protect people near you. Now, not you, but protect others around you from you. Now, I've saw people say, well, you've got a beard and all that. Yeah, I understand that. But when you compare the capabilities of that mask versus a cloth mask, and I put it over my face and then cover it and inhale, it actually sucked to my face in a way that was reducing the amount of other possible particulate and aerosol from others into my nose and mouth. So it definitely does a superior job to a standard cloth mask, and it's actually easier and more comfortable to wear than a properly fitted N95. So it's called the Airlock 389, and it works really well for high-intensity activities. I did find a little bit of a challenge trying to get on low sights on a rifle. If you have to get really on it, it was doable, but it was just a little bit in the way. But it absolutely stayed there. It was reliably there, and it did a good job for also filtering out the dust and dirt of the range. So at this point, I really like it. John K. If you could talk to any one Old West gunslinger, who would you want to talk to? That's easy for me, and it's going to be cliche. It'd be Billy the Kid. I want to talk to him about his real motivations and his thoughts about things versus what we can read into his actions versus actually talk to him. Now, we've got letters from him, and we've got some spoken word that had been, written down by friends and people around him. And that gives us a good idea, but it'd be far more interesting to be able to interact with him directly and see what kind of guy was this. Now, the narrative is he was highly intelligent, very funny, very affable. And so I'd be curious to see if that's the reality. That'd be the one I'd choose. Michael O. If you were running a 4-week boot camp for general service recruits, of which 2 weeks were dedicated to weapon training, would it be 1 week rifle and 1 week pistol, or 2 weeks rifle only? Except for specialized purposes, it would absolutely be 2 weeks on the rifle only. Generally speaking, you don't deal with pistols in the military. They don't really serve a lot of military and combative applications. Not in the military guys. There are exceptions. I understand this, but generally speaking. So I would rather spend the time really getting people laser focused and solid with a rifle. Alec M. Do you do much reloading these days? And if so, is it something you enjoy doing, or is it merely work to get specific oddball calibers you need? I do reloading, although I don't tend to do reloading for, what was generally easily accessible stuff like 9mm, 5.56, etc. My reloading is for weird things like paper cartridges for my sharps, or 4570 cartridges, mostly cowboy or Old West stuff, quite honestly. 45 Schofield, blah, blah, blah. Black powder cartridges, which you just don't buy. You have to make them. Do I enjoy it? I kind of do. It's very time consumptive. But actually, I even cast my own bullets. I mold them and lube them and roll paper cartridges. And it's actually relatively relaxing. Put on a good audiobook, sit and make your stuff. That said, it is so time consuming that it's hard to fit it in. But I don't reload rather reasonably accessible cartridges, but I do reload a lot of things for a lot of weird or old or antique stuff. John A. Is the wandering zero of a pencil barrel AR, like such an SB1, when hot, a self-correcting problem by letting the rifle cool, or is there cumulative damage other than wear on the rifling? Well, there's always cumulative damage when you fire a rifle. As you fire a rifle, the most accurate round out of a rifle is the first one fired from the barrel, right? Essentially. But no, it's not cumulative. So what happens is it's about stress relief. When you manufacture steel and heat it, the differences in the quality or the materials of the steel being inconsistent from the beginning to the end, means that it will warp differently. So when it gets hot, this part will shift differently than this part, and the barrel then does something like this. And in doing that, your zero moves. As it cools, and all of it cools, it will return to its original shape. So you should not have any problem. So if you were to get it hot, have zero shift, wait for it to cool, it'll be right back to its original zero until it gets hot again. Additionally, each barrel has its own idiosyncrasies. So when it gets hot, it will it will shift the same way it did last time. So if you know your gun intimately, and you know that when it's hot, it moves 2 minutes left, you would theoretically know to aim appropriately. That's the old school way of dealing with it. Of course, the modern way of dealing with it is making better steels, better alloys, and having better stress relief and heat treating. So that's what we said about now, is that pencil barrels now don't exhibit nearly the same level of problem that pencil barrels then. But no, it is not cumulative, and they will return to zero. And you can learn each individual rifle barrel's particular peculiarities as they get hot, if you really stick to that one gun long enough. Eki T, umpteenth time asking. Sorry, I kind of know why, though, and I'll explain that. Got an opinion on the 612 shotgun? No, I don't. I looked at it, I looked at the internet, I haven't played with one. I can't form an opinion until I use something. So when people ask, do you have an opinion on something that's not even out yet? Generally speaking, my answer is no. I can't. Do you have an opinion on something that's out that you haven't used yet? Generally speaking, my answer is no, I can't. I will give you my hot take, which is not a fair thing to do. I don't think. That's why I don't do it very much. I looked at it. I don't understand why. I don't know what its purpose is. It's interesting, I guess, kind of gee whiz. But until I use one, I'm going to stick with, I'm not sure why they're doing it. But maybe there's something there that I don't understand that would manifest when I were to get the opportunity to actually use it. So making an opinion based on some sizzle reels on the internet and a data sheet doesn't give you a real answer. I need to get the gun and use it, and not just use it once, use it relatively extensively to be able to give you real input. So my opinion is I don't understand why they're doing it. Maybe there's something there I don't understand, and maybe there is some real magic there, but until I can use one, my answer is no, I don't really have an opinion. Robert S. How does fire correction at your matches, hit, to the right, and so on, match actual battlefield experience, which you seem to try to emulate by imposing time and physical stress on shooters? I thought only dedicated snipers work with observers, not common grunts. Well, Robert, honestly, you're making a big mistake with your statement here. We're not trying to emulate combat. It's not possible. We are using the two-gun action challenge match and desert brutality environments are intended to take the sorts of things you would do in a training environment and then combine them into a match environment so that you have a match training environment that sort of converge and also be fun in the process. If it was combat training, all sorts of different things would apply. And in fact, things like to the right, to the left aren't really proper ways to call misses or hits either. If you were doing this properly, you would call clock, position, distance, all sorts of things. So, does it match actual battlefield experience? No, and we're not trying to. When people call hit, it's so the person shooting the match on the clock know that they hit, because when you have hearing protection on and you're behind the gun, you don't always hear the steel hit when it rings. So an observer can tell you so you know you've actually succeeded what you're trying to do. When people call to the right or to the left or whatever, that's something we specifically allow a two-gun action challenge match and brutality matches to make it so that it's just not a frustrating, unpleasant environment. If you've got a problem and you come out there and you're just missing, and you burn up 3 mags missing and then par out, first of all, you learned nothing. You just wasted a bunch of ammunition. So by someone actually helping you get on target, you're learning something, which is hopefully a purpose, one of the reasons to beat a match, as well as you're not just ruining the day. That's what it is. It is not in any way to simulate observers. It's not intending to simulate battlefield experience. Nate, what are some of the things that surprised you in the process of making the WWSD 2020 into a commercial product? Supply chain. Now, here's the thing. COVID hit, and I don't know how much that affected a lot of our work. We would have been in a much different place if it wasn't for 2020 being the year of COVID. That said, let's be realistic. When there's a panic buy on the market right now, and everyone wants to buy every possible component they can buy, no matter what it is, really, and there are components from multitude of different manufacturers that come together to make the What Would Stoner Do design. This actually doesn't surprise me. In fact, I'm going to iterate something I said in 2017. The challenge of making this a commercial product is trying to get the energy together from multiple different manufacturers and vendors into one place to work together to successfully produce this thing. And that's been the challenge. It still is. The supply chain is huge. If you can sell everything you can make as fast as you can make it, there's not a lot of interest to sell a subset of it to your production crew to build What Would Stoner Do rifles. Why would I sell you these 100 when I can sell 1,000 on the open market on Midway USA today? And what's the benefit to me? So that's the challenge. Supply chain is a huge challenge. It would have been a challenge without COVID. It would have been a challenge without panic buying. With COVID and panic buying, meaning manufacturing capabilities are reduced, and people are buying every possible thing that is related to guns. Yeah, supply chain's huge, and something we predicted in 2017 about the difficulty of combining multiple different manufacturers and products into one commercial product is a challenge. It's happening. We're doing it. It's slower than I wished, but I guess I shouldn't say it surprised me. I should say it didn't surprise me. I just thought we were gonna. I was hoping it wouldn't be that way, but it is. Jared L. Are you a fan of any major U.S. team sports? Hockey, football, baseball, basketball? And if so, what are your favorite teams? Nope, not at all. I don't watch any sports ball of any sort. I don't know much about any of it. And I cannot tell you my favorite teams because it's just not my thing. Blue Jay. A lot of people live in states and countries with strange and bizarre firearm restrictions. Would you consider running an experiment to see how much something like a grip fin and 10-round mags would hamper you in your time in a match environment? Honestly, no, I'm not interested in this. One, I don't think it would make much of a difference, and that might be a problem for people that think it does, and there would inevitably be controversy about, look, you're going to make them cause more restrictions, you're going to make more restrictions by demonstrating this, or on top of that, even if it did cause issues, I don't want to do it. It's not fun. I don't have these restrictions imposed on me. I live in a place where, at least at this point, thankfully, these are not an issue for me, and I don't want to do that. I'd rather hamper myself with something like this than some grip fin or something. I'm just not interested. I'm sorry. Bracket. Did you ever consider a non-standing magazine for the What Would Stoner Do project? The original AR magazine was intended to be disposable. Had Stoner known they were going to be reused, he may have chosen a different style, like the G36 magazine. No. I just mentioned a moment ago how difficult it was to bring just different products together from multiple manufacturers into one. Could you imagine the idea of trying to go with a non-standard magazine? First of all, if you want to make a firearm design fail, here's your first step. Design a magazine with it. What you want to do is use magazines that already exist and are known to be reliable on the market. The minute you go down the path of making your own magazine, you are 90% down the path of having a complete and utter failure. Magazines are magic, difficult, and weird. No, did not consider it, never crossed my mind, never would. No thank you. And by the way, PMags and generally speaking, well-maintained USGI mags solve this problem. They work fine. Aaron K., what's your thoughts on a LVPO, LPVO, low power variable optical scope, like a 1:8 or something like that, paired with an offset red dot sight? Is it legit or a gimmick? No, it's legit. So what that means is you've got your magnified optic on top. Now, technically with an LPVO, you don't need this because 1X, if it's a good LPVO, 1X with the right reticle and the right illumination doesn't need an offset. It just doesn't. I don't think it does. You're okay. But the idea of an offset red dot, like at a 45 where you cant the gun for close, actually is really pretty good. It works quite well. There's nothing wrong with it. It's legit. It's not a gimmick, and it's definitely better than saddling it on top of a scope like an ACOG. So I would say you shouldn't need it with a good LPVO, with a good 1X, but it certainly is legit. It's not a gimmick. Nick H. Why has 7.62x54R survived as a military cartridge for over a century without replacement? I don't really understand exactly, but here's what I think the case is. The reality is there's lots of countries that were all part of the eventually Comblock Soviet thing that were manufacturing it. Therefore, there's lots of manufacturing capabilities and a lot of it in the supply chain. There are lots and lots of Soviet firearms that were chambered in 7.62x54R, prolific across the world that are using it, so there's a reason to continue to manufacture it. And realistically, since the designs have mitigated the issues of having a rimmed cartridge, there's no real good reason to change. When you have a huge supply chain, stocks and stocks of it, you can make more of it at reasonably low prices, and you have tons of firearms already chambered in it. I think that's your answer. There's just no reason to change. Now, is the 7.62x54R an obsolescent cartridge? I would say yes. Every rimmed cartridge is. But when you have tons of manufacturing capability, tons of firearms chambered in it, it just isn't worth the trouble of changing. Chase C. Is it still worthwhile to buy a modern handgun for defensive use if it is not set up for a red dot? Well, yeah. I don't think you need to have a red dot. But at the same time, if a gun is offered in the capability of having a red dot, I want the red dot. This has gotten to the point where these things are reliable and are a force multiplier in terms of your ability to be more accurate at distance. They don't make you faster. I just don't think they do. That's one of the things I think is a mistake. People think red dots on a pistol make you faster. Maybe they help when you get really good, but in reality, they generally don't make you faster. They make you more capable. They make you capable of higher accuracy with less effort. So if I can have a red dot, I want it. If I can have a red dot with backup irons, I want that too on a pistol. Now, so would I say I wouldn't buy a handgun because it didn't have a red dot? No, I wouldn't say that. I don't think that that's a reasonable choice to be made. But if it's capable of having a red dot, or if there's one here that can have a red dot and one that can't, I'm going to go with the one that has the red dot. Look. L-U-K. Look? Third time asking. In your video about the FS2000, Field stripping. You listed 3 bullpups that have merits. The Steyr AUG was not one of them. Is it one of the rare non-AR-15 assault rifles that it is one of the rare non-AR-15 assault rifles that got through modernization. Some people, like 9-Hole Review, find lots of merit to it. Besides its poor performance in the mud test, why is it not on your list? I think the AUG or AUG, whatever you prefer, is a serviceable gun. I'm not saying it isn't. My personal thing with the AUG is I don't like the ergonomics. I don't like the way the gun handles. And I don't like it. I just don't care for it personally. I think it's an aging design. There are better on the market. The MDR, of course, is better. I think it's the best one on the market. The FS2000 is quite superb. The FAMAS, when it was modernized, could be a contender, but it's dead. I don't think the AUG is all that great. I just don't. It's one of those guns that is a bullpup. I would not pick that over an AR-15, that's for sure. So I don't know what to tell you besides I don't care for it. It might be personal. It's probably a subjective thing. A lot of people like them. I'm not saying you shouldn't like them. If you like them, cool. I do not consider it in the top tier of bullpups. Jacob M. Do you have any recommendations for, quote, Old West, quote, sightseeing within driving distance of Phoenix? Going to visit the family out there this summer. Oh my gosh, there's so much of this. I could go on forever and have a separate video about this alone. Now, your definition of driving distance might be different than mine. Let me just throw a couple out there to make it relatively easy. Go west out to Wickenburg. There's a ghost town out there called Vulture City. Check that out. That's a relatively easy one to get to from Phoenix. And, of course, a couple hours south, you can head down to Cochise County and you can see Tombstone, Bisbee, Benson, a wealth of Old West stuff down there. So, I mean, we're talking, so like an hour and a half west of Phoenix, you can get to Vulture City near Wickenburg. 2.5, 3 hours maybe south, depending on where you are in Phoenix. Tombstone, Bisbee, Wilcox, all of that, which you've seen extensively here on InRange. Frankly, there's a lot more than that. In Tucson, there's the Arizona Historical Society. Drive north. Well, there's Arizona Historical Society museums all over the state. Tucson's got particularly good ones. Drive north out of Phoenix up into Prescott, or better yet, Jerome. You can see some. Jerome is kind of reviving from a ghost town, but Jerome has a lot to see as well. So, a couple hours north, Jerome, Prescott. An hour and a half west, Vulture City Ghost Town. A couple hours south, you got Tombstone, Bisbee, all that. Yes, all those are all right there. Hopefully that gives you some list. And there's stuff in Phoenix proper. Cool old cemeteries. It's kind of extensive, quite honestly. But those are the ones I'd throw out there first. Canis latrons. When using Old West guns and gear in 2-gun, is there an appreciable advantage to having a cartridge like 45 that is wider in diameter than a cartridge like 357 Magnum in terms of grabbing and feeding into guns like a Winchester 1873 or a Revolver? Not really. Not really. Those guns are so slow to reload anyway, with the exception of, say, a Schofield, that the diameter difference that might make it theoretically easier to drop it into the cylinder of, like, say, a single-action Army is so not measurable that it doesn't matter. And it definitely doesn't matter when feeding it into the Kingsgate on a lever gun. So, no appreciable difference in terms of performance. Timo G. Airguns or 22s are great practice for even an advanced marksman. Do you practice with an airgun or 22 regularly? I don't now, but I used to. When I was really going after my leg points and high power, I started augmenting my marksmanship training with small bore positional, which is, I'm going to be blunt, for me at least, the definition of boring. And it is difficult. Shooting small bore prone with a sling at 100 yards is harder than shooting across the course 600 yards with a 5.56. It's harder. The targets are harder, the marksmanship requirements are harder, the wind calls are harder, and the amount of precision and fundamentals you will get out of shooting small bore positional, three position, with 22, I don't know about air rifle, I never did that, is immense, and it will transfer and go with you for the rest of your life. If you really want to focus on your marksmanship fundamentals, absolutely get into small bore. Yuri R. In Last of Mohicans, the movie, Hawkeye is seen loading his rifle with silk patches, claiming it adds 40 yards. Is there any substance to this? I don't know about silk, but you're going to be surprised to find out that this might not be incorrect. This may not be Hollywood nonsense. When you load black powder, you have to seal black powder with no air gap between the powder charge and the projectile. With patched round ball, you will frequently put a cloth patch around the ball and then seat it. And upon doing that, that cloth patch not only protects the ball from the propellant causing ball deformation, it also is what forms the seal and helps impart the rifling twist to the projectile going down the bore. This is legit. Patching with other materials like leather, which form a tighter seal to the powder charge, actually will increase velocities, therefore theoretically increasing distance. So does silk do this? I don't know. But black powder behaves this way. So like even when you're loading black powder cartridges, just the amount of compression will cause different velocities, and the amount of crimp alone will increase the dwell time, for lack of a better term really, and I know I use that phrase a lot, but will actually increase velocities in black powder. So your patching material absolutely will affect your velocities and consistency in a black powder muzzleloader. Silk might, I don't know about silk, but leather patches absolutely do. In fact, there's written diatribes from the past about using leather patches in like muzzle-loading shotguns to increase your range and power. So the point is, this might not be nonsense at all. Rebecca F. A few times asked, but do you have any advice for someone wanting to make historical videos like you do? Any pitfalls or tricks, etc.? The pitfalls are easy. The pitfall is this: rabbit holes everywhere. Let's say you want to do a topic, you want to do a video on topic A. And the reality is history is like this just spider web of stuff. And you're trying to get to A and research as much as you need to get to A and have the right, as correct an answer about the realities of A that you can. The reality of just sliding down topic B, C, D, E, F, and then losing your path to A is easy. So you have to stay laser focused on making sure, what is the point of this historical video? I'm talking about topic A. Sometimes you'll mention, this happened B, this happened C, this happened D, which you'll see on my videos where I'm like, topics for another time. And that's the biggest pitfall, are these rabbit holes that you can just like, and fall into. In terms of tricks, as many books and as many resources as you can get. Primary sources are the best, but not just one, as many of them as you can get, because you're going to come to find that the common narrative of history is generally a group delusion, and everyone's telling either their version of the truth or straight up lies that they want to be the truth. And the only way to get closer to the truth, because you never really get there, is to have as many resources as possible, and primary sources are the best. So pitfalls, avoid rabbit holes. Tricks, sources. Phase. What is the most science fiction-y gun-related technology you think we'll actually have within the next 10 years? Something I've mentioned a bunch on the channel. This probably isn't all that exciting, but I think we're going to see guns that contain powered rail systems. They're already starting to happen. You're going to put a battery in the back, and that's going to charge and keep your red dot running, all of your electronics running, your laser, your light, maybe with even inductive charging. I don't know. But I don't think we're going to see something super science fiction. We're not going to see like laser guns or something like that. But I think we might see guns that are self-contained in terms of power. Colin H. Which cartridge handled the transition to smokeless powder better? 4570, 45 Colt, 4440, or perhaps one I haven't listed. Actually, all of them did fine. I think it's easier to load relatively straight wall cartridges. 4440 has a shoulder to it, and part of the reason for the shoulder and a very thin mouth and neck was to expand better under black powder, to therefore theoretically prevent less black powder fouling from getting into the action of the gun in the chamber. So 4440 is a really difficult cartridge to load, whether you're loading it with smokeless or black powder. It dents real easy. It damages easily. And doesn't last very long because of the very thin walls. So I'd say 4440 would be the worst of this list. 4570, 45 Colt. The only challenge with these when you go to smokeless powder is they're very large cartridges. that with black powder needed to be to have the volume of powder to get the velocity they wanted. But when you go to smokeless, you're putting little tiny powder charges into 45-70 and 45 Colt, and it's easy to double, triple, quadruple charge a 45 Colt case, which of course is a catastrophic event. Also easy to do with 45-70. So when you go to smokeless powder in an originally black powder cartridge, you have to be very, very careful that you're making sure you're measuring your charges and only placing one charge into cartridge cases. So in that regard, the cartridge cases that moved from black powder to smokeless powder better were the ones that were actually very low velocity in the day and small, because it's much harder to load inappropriate or double charges into smaller cartridge cases. 44 a lot of the 44 cartridges, 44 Russian would be an example of that, where they're smaller and therefore it's easier to not accidentally double charge a cartridge case. But really, I just prefer generally straight wall cartridges. They're easier to deal with. They last longer. 45-70 and 45 Colt cartridges, for example, will last almost infinitely unless you're doing something weird. Seth N. You clearly avoid using profanity even in situations that warrant it. Do you have a broader philosophy about potty language? Well, I don't always avoid it. It shows up on the channel from time to time, and some of my guests use it without any concern. I use it without any concern. I don't care about quote-unquote profanity. It doesn't bother me in the least. It's just language. It doesn't mean much to me in that regard. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't offend me. The reason I try to avoid it on the channel is because it offends some people. And since other people have different views on that than I try to make sure that there's no reason to do that. There's no reason. I don't need to use it, so there's no reason to do it because it might cause someone to be uncomfortable, or frankly, it causes complaints. And so I'm not going to prevent others on my channel from using it if that's their normal vernacular and how they speak. But every time they do, I get lots of complaints. But I'm not here to stop them from speaking the way they wish to speak. I myself tend to avoid it because it's just not necessary and it isn't worth the trouble. Jose Hey Soup. What do you think about current day fighting lever action? What do you think a current day fighting lever action should consist of? Subtle enhancements like a light RMR threaded muzzle, or a clean sheet with a modern engineering design and materials? I don't think I'd want to take an original design and modernize it so much. What I would want to see a modern lever action do is be just as fast, as slick as a toggle link action is, like a 73, but I'd want it to be magazine fed so that you wouldn't have to deal with the reload issue. I'd want it to remain light, svelte, and small, like those guns are. They're very handy and ergonomic. But I would still want it to have the capability of mounting a modern red dot and it may be a light without interfering with the capabilities of the lever gun. Where I see the lever guns that are modernized fail is they just take a lever gun, tack some rails on it, still retain a loading gate, and call it modernized. And I don't think that's modernized. Modernized would be magazine fed, just as slick as a 73, possibly toggle link that could deal with modern pressures, and the capability of a modern optic and a light. Philip K. Last question, by the way, guys. Repeat question. Is the Forgotten Warrior t-shirt line discontinued? I remember there was plans once. We did 2 of them. The Polish Resistance Fighter one is still available. If you go to the BBTV store for InRange TV, you can still get the Polish Resistance Fighter. The other one we did, which was a Crow Warrior, did not sell well and just died on the vine. And after the Crow Warrior one didn't do well, it sort of just dropped off the radar as something we were going to pursue further. The Polish Resistance Fighter one continues to sell, and it's still on the store, in the store. So if you want the Polish Resistance Fighter one, go check it out. Maybe I'll review this someday. I'd like to do them personally. I find them interesting and compelling, but the second one in the line was the Crow Warrior one, and it was a flop. So if something doesn't sell, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to continue pursuing the idea. Maybe we just need to do other ones based on other historical warriors. I don't know. Considering the Polish one continues to do well, maybe I'll revisit it. But at the moment, it's not completely dead. You can buy the Polish one on BBTV store. But as for that, it kind of died on the vine. Guys, hope you enjoyed this. I don't even know how long this was. I hope you, thank you very much to all the patrons that make this channel possible. Thank you for supporting the channel. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your continued support, because without you, InRange doesn't continue to exist. As I said, if you'd like to be in on the Q&As, I know I can't answer every question. There's just too many. If yours didn't get in there, ask it next month and add on there. This is my second time asking, and I'll try to get to it like you saw on this one. If you'd like to be involved in this, please consider supporting us on Patreon. $5 and above gets you into the monthly Q&A, and there's other tiers for other benefits as well. If you can't totally understand, just subscribe to the channel. You can find InRange on multiple different distribution points, not just YouTube. You can find them all at InRange.tv/watch. But even more importantly, because I am proactively demonetized, the algorithm is not my friend, and I need your help to share with your friends. So if you find this video interesting or others interesting, please make sure you share it, because the algorithm doesn't do it for me. Also, comments help as well. Thanks for watching.